In this episode of Cycling Tours, I will explore the cycling network within the western sector of Bedok. A warm welcome to yet another episode of Cycling Tours. It's a windy and sunny Saturday today, a great day for a bicycle ride, and we'll be starting at Kembangan and ending at Eunos MRT station, featuring the Kembangan, Frankel, and Siglap subzones. Now this video will mainly feature the Park Connector network, which forms the main bulk of the cycling infrastructure in this vicinity. But after using this sidewalk along the one-way Changi Road, we will begin with a quick look at the cycling path along Jalan Kembangan. It is physically separated from both the roadway and the covered walkway, which is nice. For some reason though, the lampposts are built on top of it. Crossing Sims Avenue though, we pass a brief narrow stretch along Kembangan MRT station, and the path briefly continues as a shared path. But it wouldn't be long before it comes to an end at the roundabout with Lengkong Tiga, Lengkong being Cape in Malay, and Tiga meaning the numeral 3. Although not a shared path, I'll travel along this random path next to Kampung Kembangan Community Club here, which leads to Jalan Senang Linear Park in the opposite direction, a pedestrian link following a canal. Being technically not a shared path, the linear park will not be featured in this video, but since it greatly improves walking and cycling connectivity between Kembangan and Chai Chee, perhaps you can expect a short form video about it soon. In the meantime though, I shall briefly borrow the Siglap Park Connector before splitting through this non-roadside shared path that cuts right through the heart of the Kembangan estate, between the Kembangan Gardens housing precinct to my right and a yet unnamed precinct 110 to 116 Lengkong Tiga to my left. What I call Kembangan Gardens link will then merge with Lorong Melayu on the other side of the estate, on a path with many protruding drain gratings, and then loop around the Kembangan Gardens precinct, travelling along Jalan Daud, before merging with the Siglap Park Connector once again. I will loop around at the Pen Island Expressway, next to the Windy Heights condo, to avoid the pedestrian overhead bridge leading to the Kaki Bukit cycling town, where work is currently ongoing to build cycling paths. Instead, I will show you the entirety of the Siglap Park Connector south of this point, built within the drainage reserve of the Siglap Canal back in 2002, which happens to provide a decent cycling route to Kembangan MRT station and the East Coast Park, although it comes with a few compromises. For one, I do find it bizarre that there was an attempt to segregate the pedestrian and cycling lanes on this park connector, with the footpath closer to the canal, as if people are supposed to walk by to admire a glamorous waterway. Who would like to admire this concrete drain? With the many interruptions requiring shared zones, this overcomplicates things, and a fully shared design would have been better. We have the straight tracks here to the other side of the canal at this plaza, and that won't be immediately apparent if you aren't familiar with this route. And there will be a need to divert around Kembangan MRT station, which was built without park connectors in mind, predating it by over a decade, back in 1989. The official routing of the park connector involves wrapping around the east side of the MRT station, where you will find 288 bicycle parking lots, well utilized by residents commuting along this park connector. Then, I cross the signalized intersection and follow this dingy widened footpath along Sims Avenue East, along the periphery of the trams. Eventually, I would turn left at this mid-block crossing which officially connects Siglap and Sims Avenue Park connectors, and Siglap Park Connector will continue along Siglap Canal, all the way to the East Coast Park. There are a few road crossings along the way, such as this one with Changi Road, providing good connectivity between this north-south cycling route and many east-west roadways. However, you will see that there aren't any cycling paths in the vicinity at the moment, and that is because of the more traditional development form in the vicinity, with small land parcels and shorter buildings, which are densely packed next to each other with little setbacks. The current way of building cycling infrastructure in Singapore involves off-road cycling paths, and space can be taken from spacious green verges used for maintenance or by intruding into land used for public housing. That works in new towns built in a more modernist or contemporary manner because there's always fringe land to facilitate road widening. But because of the more traditional development form here, with small land parcels and small developments without building setbacks, space is a real constraint here, and this is why there are little intentions to build a dense dedicated cycling path network within this vicinity. I'll talk more about whether such a network is even necessary in this environment later on, when I travel northwards along Siglap Linear Park. But currently, I'm passing the many lorongs of Telok Kurau, with Franco and Dunbar to my left. It's worth noting that despite the density of access streets in both estates, none of them allow vehicular access across Siglap Canal, so all lorongs in Telok Kurau will come to a dead end along this park connector. This encourages walking and cycling in two ways. First, it introduces filtered permeability by making it possible to walk and cycle along more direct routes and a more pleasant environment where driving is prohibited. Second, it restricts the lorongs to only local access traffic and prevents red running, forcing through traffic to the arterial roads like Changi Road to the north and East Coast Road to the south. This lowers traffic volumes in the neighborhood, creating a quieter and less polluted environment for the residents here. Crossing East Coast Road, where the original coastline of Singapore resides, I enter land that is reclaimed from the sea. Siglap Canal emerges from beneath once again, and this time the park connector runs along the east side of the canal, opposite St. Patrick's School and along private housing precincts like Costa Arena and Ocean Park. But it won't be long before I have to cross yet another roadway, the Marine Parade Road. The journey here from Kembangan would take less than 7 minutes, which is pretty time competitive when compared to bus service 135, and even then it serves East Coast and not Marine Parade Road. It goes to show how bikes can be a fast mode of last mile transportation, given direct infrastructure, and is especially useful for students here. The park connector fronts many schools here, like the CHIJ Katong Convent to the right and Victoria Junior College to the left, making it possible for many students to cycle to school from Kembangan MRT station. It will probably be more convenient to take any one of the many bus services along this road though, or the Thomson East Coast Line to the future Marine Terrace station, when it opens not too long from now. But hey, it's always good to have options. Approaching the East Coast Parkway, I'll have to take this bridge across the canal and travel onto the barrier-free ramps of a pedestrian overhead bridge to get to East Coast Park. The arrows in the no riding signs demarcate the zone in which active mobility users are legally required to dismount and push, which is what I will do here. While such a route is probably necessary for the safety of others using this narrow overhead bridge, and perhaps for fear of people losing control of their devices and falling off the bridge, it does make an already laborious trip to the East Coast Park even longer for active mobility devices, making it less accessible as a commuter cycling route. Such a bridge is unfortunately necessary due to the aggregate nature of the ECP, a border that impedes access for Singaporeans living in the vicinity to the coastline. Now, you may remember that I try to avoid cycling within town parks in other cycling tours videos, as their utility as a commuting route isn't as good. East Coast Park, however, is very different. While other parks may be connected on only one end to the Park Connector network, East Coast Park is connected on multiple ends, so it is a true route for cycling. Spanning the entire length of the East Coast across 7 areas from A to H, the park provides the only high-quality, fast and direct path for cyclists to travel off-road in the east-west orientation along the East Coast. This modern-day shared path has an interesting past. You see, back in the 1970s, the East Coast Park was built with a cycle track in mind to accommodate cyclists who are pushed off the road by an increasing car population as an alternative to cycling with vehicles along the Mountbatten, East Coast and Marine Parade roads. It became so overused that plans were announced to extend the cycle track from 9 to 18 kilometers in 1981. For much of the way, the cycle track is physically segregated from the footpath to my right, which joggers are meant to use. Back then, neither joggers were allowed on the cycle track nor cyclists on the footpath. Today though, the cycle track is no longer a dedicated path for cyclists, but a 25 km per hour shared path meant to be enjoyed by joggers, bikers, skateboarders, scooter riders, and so on. However it is designed, this park is clearly friendly to cyclists. It even has a cyclist park in it. This was opened in 2019 and consists of cycling-related shops and 2 cycling circuits. The shared path has been realigned here, while the old cycle track curves leftwards inland onto this now concrete path over here. The new shared path continues straight and narrows. For the sake of continuity with the video for the southern sector of Bedok, where I will continue the journey along East Coast Park, I took a longer route by looping around the East Coast Lagoon, housing the Singapore Wake Park, to head to the Lagoon View Underpass. This is in preparation for the northwards journey along Siglap Linear Park, not to be confused with the Siglap Park connector that I travelled along earlier. The same underpass is shared by the outdoor play corridor, yet another north-south axis east of Siglap Linear Park that runs through Bedok New Town, to be covered in the video for the southern sector. Unlike the pedestrian overhead bridge earlier, cycling is now permissible in the underpasses connecting to East Coast Park, like the Lagoon View underpass I'm riding on right now. It is of course essential that you travel down the underpass slowly, for it is narrow and cramped and shared with pedestrians. I'm now travelling on a shared path in Siglap Link. I believe it is now a good time to point out that the island-wide cycling network is currently rapidly expanding in Singapore, so this video will only feature the cycling paths that have been built as of the time of its recording in January 2024. Therefore, it's very likely that this video will be outdated by the time you watch it. It will no longer provide an exhaustive picture of the cycling network here. That's especially the case because of ongoing works to build cycling paths near Siglap MRT station right now, an MRT station that is part of Stage 4 of the Thomson East Coast Line, which is yet to open as of the date of recording. Of course, it isn't long before I find myself in Siglap Linear Park, which runs through a lot of lower density private residential housing, with development controls restricting building heights to no more than 2 or 3 floors. It makes for a rather homely and rustic appearance, quite unlike the new town to its east. It's worth noting that while this linear park predates the Siglap Park Connector, it was only park connectorized in the early 2010s, with curb cuts installed at Figaro and Fidelio streets then, which were eventually upgraded to raised zebra crossings in the mid-2010s, allowing for a barrier-free cycling route. This linear park is not very busy at this time of the day, but usually you will see plenty of people enjoying their time while making a passage through it. Not just your typical joggers and cyclists, but also dog walkers from the affluent housing areas surrounding it. Things start to get a little shady around Jalan Bangsawan, where the park connector proper ends, dumping me amid a landed housing estate. This path would not lead me to New Upper Changi Road, which is where I want to go since a few people's houses are in the way. Space constraints prevent cycling or shared paths from being built here, and that's a big problem. You see, I'm not wearing a helmet today, and I cannot legally cycle on the road, as since 2019, the mandatory helmet law applies to Singapore for cyclists on the road. This could make sense on fast arterial roads, but it makes no sense on quiet access streets leading to landed housing like this, so cycling along this roadway without a helmet is illegal, even though it may be a few minutes before a car passes by. Fortunately, the rule doesn't apply to cyclists directly crossing the road to get from one path to another, so I have to take this very convoluted path routing, which makes absolutely no sense in landed housing estates like this one, with even narrower footpaths that are obstructed by rubbish bins, potted plants, illegally parked motorcycles, and this bush. Well, this is ridiculous. If only the street could be made a bicycle boulevard, or at least if only the mandatory helmet law doesn't apply on this kind of street in a landed housing estate, then many residents in the vicinity will be able to commute on a bicycle without a helmet and with great comfort on the road, and eventually onto trunk dedicated infrastructure like the Siglap Linear Park and the Park Connector. We now leave an area with landed housing for one with public housing, the Chai Chee Estate. I'll briefly cross Chai Chee Road through a two-stage informal crossing that was built as part of its reconfiguration to become a silver zone in 2019. This is to travel on a 110-meter long cycling path that was needlessly built, connecting nowhere to a mid-block bicycle crossing. So for a more coherent video flow, I'll travel on the main cycling path along this road, from the north to the south. Now, this Chai Chee Estate was mainly built in 1972, predating Bedok New Town, a few short years before the sprawling town began construction to its immediate east throughout the late 1970s. If you couldn't tell, it is extremely hilly here, with a downslope the further south you go, making things a little challenging for manual-powered bikes, but it's still cyclable. This hilly terrain may appear to be very different from the rather flat terrain you get further east in Bedok and Tampines, but that's only because the hills in those towns were excavated between the 1960s and the 1980s to be used as material to reclaim land for the East Coast Park. If those hills weren't cut, those towns will have a terrain similar to the one you find here in Chai Chee, which will make them much harder to walk and cycle in. Now, there are many weird quirks with the cycling network of Bedok when compared to other cycling towns featuring red cycling paths. I will elaborate on them in future videos. But for now, one of them is the fact that the cycling path is further away from the roadway than the footpath, which results in a conflict point every time I meet a perpendicular path or staircase. It is strange to see such a sight so prominently in a cycling town featuring red cycling paths, because other towns like Ang Mo Kio and Tampines would swap the position of the cycling and footpaths to minimize the number of conflict points between various path users. Another issue with this positioning of the cycling path is that the retaining walls are located uncomfortably close to my handlebars if I keep to the left half of the cycling path. So the cycling path here is unable to accommodate two passing cyclists in opposite directions properly, being way too narrow for it. For now though, I'll be looping around Chai Chee, using a short stretch of the Bedok Play Corridor, which I feature in full over the videos for the northern and southern sector of Bedok. I'll point out even more idiosyncrasies with the cycling path once I enter Chai Chee Street. Bedok North Avenue 1 is currently undergoing road widening works, which also involve the construction of new cycling paths near this intersection with Chai Chee Street. The paths have not been painted, but I do not think I want to wait for such work to be done, so pardon the lack of paint markings for this short section of the pavement, which might be completed by the time you watch this video. Another thing which I don't quite like about Bedok is the use of such metal grills when a cycling path is placed right next to a slope. While such a grill can help reduce the severity of accidents in case a cyclist or pedestrian fall off the pavement, it can also induce accidents if a bicycle deviates too much by getting the handlebars caught between the grills. When the cycling path becomes physically separated, the clear width for bicycles decreases even more. Meanwhile, do notice the use of a sign that you don't see elsewhere at this bus stop near the Pingy Greens precinct, pointing cyclists left and pedestrians right. The intended message is to encourage cyclists to bypass a bus stop by travelling behind it, but it could also be misinterpreted as asking cyclists to turn left to continue their journey. Perhaps that's why such a sign isn't used in newer designs nowadays. Also, this shared path has plenty of curb cuts to allow for vehicles to access adjacent developments like the SATA ComHealth building. This particular access road with huge corner radii is just asking for cars to drive in at a dangerously high speed without looking out for pedestrians and cyclists who may already be crossing halfway through, and a road narrowing here would be desirable to reduce the daunting crossing distances. I'll briefly turn right to explore this spur cycling route along Chai Chee Lane, serving a few light industrial buildings in the vicinity. Now this particular path is unusual in that it provides no safety buffer between the cyclists on the cycling path and passing motor vehicles on the road. But a worse mistake is made with the footpath to my right. You'll see in a few short moments now that it doesn't lead anywhere useful, ending at a drain opening. Many factory and office workers will therefore walk on the cycling path, because who wants to walk on the grass to get to the footpath? My journey shall continue briefly along Chai Chee Street, but not for long as I turn into Chai Chee Drive. Chai Chee Drive meets New Upper Changi Road at the apex of a hill, higher than even the MRT track viaduct that turns into a tunnel over here. Hence, there's a very steep upslope for cyclists, which may make things a little difficult on the shared bike I'm riding. Perhaps that's why the cycling path comes to an abrupt end at this mid-block bicycle crossing, which I will use to get onto the footpath on the other side, in preparation for a cycling path that leads to Kembangan MRT station. But it sure won't be an enjoyable experience cycling here on footpaths. The road lanes are huge, and the footpath is very narrow. The cycling path briefly appears as I approach the tunnel portal for the east-west line, where a viaduct will soon emerge, leading trains to Kembangan Station. This is also where the two-way road diverges into two one-way roads, built as part of a road system from the 1980s to improve traffic flow. The placement of the signs appear to tease what the path could have been, but unfortunately the cycling path isn't quite there. Now, while it may be tempting to freewheel down this steep slope here, do remember to give way to vehicles at all the side streets at the base of this hill. The last path to be covered in this video is a section of the Sims Avenue Park Connector running beneath the east-west line tracks from Kembangan to Eunos. This path serves as the next best trunk cycling route between the city and the east, after the East Coast Park, and it was built pretty recently in 2016. Many compromises have to be made to negotiate the path around the viaduct pillars. The path weaves and splits now and then. In an attempt to traffic calm Park Connector users, raised informal crossings are built to be misaligned from the Park Connector itself. This makes the Park Connector windier, not ideal for commuting, but hey, at least it exists. Unfortunately, what you see on the map doesn't necessarily correspond with what you see in reality. Here the Park Connector technically continues along this footpath next to its namesake road, but there are no hints of the Park Connector here, with its distinctive paint on the ground or signs on the side. To an untrained eye, you wouldn't think this covered walkway is part of the Park Connector, but it is. Crossing Jalan Eunos, I leave Bedok and enter Geylang Cycling Town, which is not within the scope of this video. However, this video has to end at a major transport node, which in this case is Eunos MRT station, so that is what I'm cycling towards. All in all, it's quite interesting to see the few park connectors that span the residential estates here, and we caught a glimpse of the mildly weird cycling paths in Bedok as well. But it wouldn't be enough for me to make an educated judgment on Bedok. That will have to wait for future videos featuring the north and the south of the new town. As I dismount and push my bike through the Eunos bus interchange, I come to the end of this episode of Cycling Tours. Do give your thoughts in the comment section below and feel free to support me using the super thanks function of YouTube. This is Transit Evolution, signing off.